I never thought I'd find myself standing in a principal's office again at 38 years old, clutching my daughter's hand so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Lucy was 12, small for her age, with auburn hair that fell in waves around her shoulders and the kind of smile that lit up a room. When she chose to smile, that is. Recently, those smiles had become increasingly rare. "Mom, you don't have to do this," Lucy whispered, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I'm used to it." Those 5 words broke my heart more than anything else she could have said. No child should ever be used to cruelty. "Yes, I do," I replied, my voice steady despite the anger churning inside me. "What they're doing isn't just wrong, Lucy. It's cruel." The trouble had started 3 months ago when we moved to this small town in Vermont after my husband's passing. I'd hoped the change of scenery would help us both heal. But instead, Lucy had become a target at her new school. At first, I'd written off her quietness as grief. But last night, she'd finally broken down and told me everything. "They call me the broken girl," she'd sobbed into my shoulder. "They say I walk like a zombie, like I'm sick. Tommy Mitchell started it, but now everyone does it. They imitate me in the hallways." Lucy had been born with a mild form of cerebral palsy that affected her gait. It wasn't severe, just enough to give her a distinctive walk with a slight drag to her right foot. In our old town, where she'd grown up with the same kids since kindergarten, no one had ever mentioned it. Here, it had become her defining characteristic. The door to Principal Diane Reynolds' office opened, and a tall woman with silver-streaked dark hair regarded us with professional detachment. "Mrs. Pearson, I presume. Please come in." I followed her inside, still holding Lucy's hand. The office was neat and well-organized, with educational certificates lining one wall and a large window overlooking the school grounds on another. "I understand you're here about some concerns regarding Lucy's treatment by her classmates," Principal Reynolds said, gesturing for us to sit. "I want to assure you that Westfield Middle takes bullying very seriously." Her tone was practiced, almost rehearsed. I'd spent 15 years as a physical therapist before taking a break to care for Lucy after James died. I'd learned to read people, to notice the disconnect between what they said and what their body language revealed. Principal Reynolds' slightly stiffened posture told me she was already on the defensive. "With all due respect, Principal Reynolds, if the school took bullying seriously, we wouldn't be sitting here today," I said, keeping my voice level. "My daughter has been mocked for months because of how she walks. She's been called sick and broken. These aren't isolated incidents. It's become a daily ritual." Principal Reynolds' expression softened slightly as she looked at Lucy, who was studying her own hands, folded tightly in her lap. "Lucy, is this true? Why haven't you reported this to your teachers or to me?" Lucy looked up, her eyes glistening. "I did. Twice. Mrs. Bennett told me that kids will be kids and that I shouldn't be so sensitive." I felt a flash of white-hot anger. "That's completely unacceptable," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "My daughter has cerebral palsy. It's not something she can control or change. For a teacher to dismiss her concerns and essentially tell her to toughen up." "I wasn't aware of this," Principal Reynolds interrupted, her brow furrowed. "I'll speak with Mrs. Bennett immediately. But Mrs. Pearson, I'd like to address this issue directly. Would you and Lucy be comfortable if I called the main instigators to my office now? Sometimes confronting this behavior head-on is the most effective approach." I glanced at Lucy, who looked terrified, but gave a small nod. "Yes," I said firmly. "I think that's exactly what needs to happen." 20 minutes later, Tommy Mitchell and 3 other boys sat uncomfortably in chairs across from us, avoiding eye contact. Principal Reynolds had also summoned their homeroom teacher, Mrs. Bennett, a woman in her 50s, with a perpetual expression of mild inconvenience on her face. "Boys," Principal Reynolds began, "I've asked you here because it's been brought to my attention that you've been mocking Lucy for the way she walks. Is this true?" Tommy, a stocky boy with dark hair and an expensive-looking jacket, shrugged. "We were just joking around. It's not a big deal." I felt Lucy tense beside me and squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Not a big deal?" I repeated, unable to keep the edge from my voice. "My daughter comes home in tears because you and your friends think it's funny to imitate her walk. How would you feel if someone mocked something about you that you couldn't change?" "Mrs. Pearson," Mrs. Bennet interjected. "Children tease each other. It's part of growing up. Lucy needs to develop thicker skin if—" "No," I cut her off, my professional demeanor slipping. "Bullying is not part of growing up. It's cruelty, plain and simple. And for a teacher to suggest that the victim needs to change rather than addressing the behavior of those responsible is deeply troubling." Mrs. Bennet's face flushed. "I merely meant—" "I think I understand what Mrs. Pearson is saying," Principal Reynolds interrupted. She turned to the boys. "Tommy, Max, Jake, Ethan, what you've been doing is bullying. It's hurtful, it's unacceptable, and it stops today. I'm going to ask Mrs. Pearson if she would be willing to explain Lucy's condition to your class, so everyone can better understand." I nodded, though I hated that Lucy's medical condition needed to be explained for her to be treated with basic decency. "Furthermore," Principal Reynolds continued, "I'd like to implement a school-wide assembly on respect and understanding differences, and as for immediate consequences—" A knock at the door interrupted her. The school secretary poked her head in. "I'm sorry, Principal Reynolds, but Ms. Keller is here for her monthly observation. She's waiting in Ms. Matthews' 7th grade class." Principal Reynolds' expression changed subtly. "I'd forgotten that was today. I'll be right there." She turned back to us. "Mrs. Pearson, Lucy, would you mind accompanying me? I'd like Ms. Keller to hear about this situation firsthand. She's our district superintendent." I agreed, and we all filed out of the office, the boys and Mrs. Bennet included. Principal Reynolds led us down the hallway toward the 7th grade classrooms. As we approached, I could hear the familiar sounds of a middle school class. Voices rising and falling, occasional laughter, the scrape of chairs. Principal Reynolds paused outside the door. "Lucy, would you mind walking ahead of us into the classroom? I want Ms. Keller to see exactly what these boys have been mocking." I bristled at the request. I don't think my daughter should have to perform her disability. "No, Mom. It's okay," Lucy said quietly. "I want them to see there's nothing wrong with how I walk." Before I could protest further, Principal Reynolds opened the door. The classroom fell silent as we all stood in the doorway. A dignified-looking woman in her 60s sat at the back of the room, observing. "Class, please remain quiet," Principal Reynolds announced. "Lucy, would you please walk to Ms. Matthews' desk and back?" The entire room watched as Lucy, head held high, walked across the classroom with her distinctive gait. I felt a surge of pride at my daughter's courage. Then something unexpected happened. The woman at the back of the room, Ms. Keller presumably, suddenly went pale. She gripped the edge of the desk she was sitting at and slowly stood up. "Lucy," she whispered, her voice carrying in the silent room. "Lucy Pearson?" Lucy turned, confusion evident on her face. "Yes?" Ms. Keller leaned against the wall, her face drained of color. This can't be a coincidence." Principal Reynolds looked bewildered. "Ms. Keller, are you all right?" The older woman moved forward, her eyes never leaving Lucy. "That walk. I know that walk." She turned to me. "You're Sarah Pearson, formerly Sarah Conley?" I stared at her in shock. "Yes, but how did you—" 25 years ago, I had a patient," Ms. Keller said, her voice trembling slightly. "A young girl with the same type of cerebral palsy as your daughter. I was a physical therapist before I went into education. That girl's name was Sarah Conley." The room spun around me. "You're Catherine Keller," I whispered. "You're the therapist who helped me learn to walk properly after my surgery." Ms. Keller nodded, tears welling in her eyes. And now your daughter walks exactly as you did at her age, the same determination in her stride. Tommy Mitchell shifted uncomfortably. Wait, you had the same thing? Yes, I said, turning to face him and the other boys. I had the exact same condition Lucy has, and I had my own Tommy Mitchells when I was growing up. I paused, looking directly at Ms. Keller. But I also had people who stood up for me and showed me that my difference wasn't a weakness. Ms. Keller stepped forward, addressing the entire class. I worked with Mrs. Pearson for 2 years when she was about your age. Today, she's one of the most respected physical therapists in the Northeast, or at least she was before taking time off. She's helped hundreds of children just like herself, just like Lucy. The room was completely silent now. Children, Ms. Keller continued, the way someone walks, talks, or looks doesn't determine their worth or what they can achieve. It's how they treat others that matters. And right now, some of you are failing at the most important lesson you'll ever learn. She turned to Tommy and the other boys. How does it feel to know that the woman you were mocking has helped children just like you overcome challenges far greater than anything you've faced? The transformation in the room was palpable. Tommy looked at his shoes, his face burning with shame. Principal Reynolds, who had been watching this exchange in amazement, finally spoke. I think we've all learned something important today, and I believe some apologies are in order. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Tommy Mitchell, who had seemed so intimidating just moments before, now looked small and uncomfortable as he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. I'm sorry, he finally mumbled, staring at the floor. Look at Lucy when you apologize. Ms. Keller instructed gently but firmly. An apology isn't just words. It's acknowledging the person you've hurt. Tommy raised his eyes to meet Lucy's. I'm sorry, Lucy. What I did was mean. I didn't think about how it made you feel. The other boys followed suit, each offering apologies that started awkwardly, but grew more genuine as they spoke. Jake, the tallest of the group, seemed particularly affected. My cousin has autism, he admitted quietly. I get mad when people make fun of him. I should have known better than to do it to someone else. Lucy nodded at each apology, her posture gradually relaxing. I could see her processing this sudden shift, trying to determine if it was sincere or merely performed for the adults in the room. Principal Reynolds cleared her throat. I believe this is a valuable teaching moment for everyone. Ms. Matthews, would you mind if we took a few minutes to discuss this as a class? The 7th grade teacher, who had been watching the scene unfold with wide eyes, nodded immediately. Of course, Ms. Keller stepped forward, naturally assuming a leadership role. I'd like to ask Mrs. Pearson if she would be willing to share a bit about her experience growing up with cerebral palsy, and perhaps about her work as a physical therapist. All eyes turned to me. I hadn't expected to be put on the spot, but looking at those young faces, some curious, some uncomfortable, all attentive, I knew this might be the most important speech I'd ever give. When I was Lucy's age, I began, moving to the front of the classroom. I had already undergone 2 surgeries to help with my mobility. Every day was a battle between what my brain wanted my body to do and what my body was actually capable of. The hardest part wasn't the physical pain or the hours of therapy. It was walking down school hallways like this one, feeling everyone's eyes on me, hearing the whispers and sometimes the not-so-whispered comments. I glanced at Lucy, who was watching me with a new expression, something between surprise and pride. I realized I had never really told her much about my own struggles at her age. The worst day of my middle school life wasn't when Billy Marsden imitated my walk in the cafeteria and made everyone laugh. It was the day after, when my best friend pretended not to know me because she didn't want to be associated with the girl everyone was making fun of. Isolation hurts more than mockery. Several students squirmed in their seats, perhaps recognizing themselves in that former friend. But then I met Ms. Keller, I continued, smiling at the superintendent. She didn't just help me physically. She showed me that my disability didn't define me, that in some ways it could even become my strength. Ms. Keller stepped beside me. Sarah, Mrs. Pearson, was one of the most determined patients I ever worked with. That determination is what I see in Lucy's walk too. It's not something to mock, it's something to admire. A girl in the back raised her hand tentatively. What do you mean it became your strength? I considered how to answer. My experience with cerebral palsy is why I became a physical therapist. I wanted to help others the way Ms. Keller helped me. And because I know what it feels like to struggle with my own body, I connect with my patients in a way other therapists sometimes can't. The very thing some kids mocked me for became the foundation of my career. Ms. Matthews, sensing a teaching opportunity, asked, "What would you suggest our students do if they see someone being bullied for a disability or any difference?" "Speak up," I said without hesitation. One voice opposing cruelty can make all the difference. When everyone is laughing or looking away, be the one person who says, "That's not okay." You might think it won't matter, but to the person being targeted, it means everything. I looked directly at the students who had been tormenting Lucy. And if you've been the one doing the mocking, it's never too late to change. True strength isn't about having power over others. It's about having the courage to admit when you're wrong and to do better. As I spoke, I noticed Tommy Mitchell watching me with an intensity that suggested my words were hitting home. There was something in his expression beyond mere shame, perhaps recognition. After the impromptu discussion, Principal Reynolds suggested that Lucy and I wait in her office while she spoke privately with Ms. Keller and the teachers. As we walked back down the hallway, Lucy was uncharacteristically quiet. "You okay, sweetheart?" I asked, putting my arm around her shoulders. She nodded slowly. "Why didn't you ever tell me that you went through the same thing?" I sighed. "I guess I hoped you'd never need to know. When you were little and we first got your diagnosis, your father and I decided we wouldn't treat your CP as something that limited you. We wanted you to define yourself, not have your condition define you. But after Dad died, everything changed," I admitted. "I was so focused on getting us through each day that I missed the signs of what was happening at school. I should have prepared you better." Lucy stopped walking and looked up at me. "You're really a good physical therapist? Like really good?" I smiled, surprised by the question. "I will be again, when the time is right. Ms. Keller said you were respected, that you helped hundreds of kids. I've been lucky to work with many amazing children over the years." Lucy seemed to be processing something. "Do you think, could I do that too someday? Help people like us?" My heart swelled at the "like us." The first time Lucy had ever verbally included herself in the same category as me, acknowledging our shared experience rather than seeing her CP as something that made her different or less than. "You can do anything you set your mind to, Lucy. You've got my determination, remember?" A hint of a smile touched her lips. "And Dad's stubbornness." I laughed. "That too." When we returned to Principal Reynolds' office, we found not just her and Ms. Keller waiting for us, but also Mrs. Bennett, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Mrs. Pearson, Lucy," Principal Reynolds began, "I want to personally apologize for what's happened. There was a failure at multiple levels here, and as the head of this school, that responsibility ultimately falls on me." Mrs. Bennett cleared her throat. "I owe you both an apology as well. I was wrong to dismiss Lucy's complaints. I've been teaching for 25 years, and I've become complacent in some ways. That's no excuse." I appreciated her honesty, even if it had taken this extraordinary situation to bring it about. Ms. Keller, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "Sarah, seeing you again after all these years, and meeting your daughter, feels like coming full circle. It's made me realize how much more work we still have to do in our schools regarding acceptance and understanding of disabilities. She turned to Principal Reynolds. Diane, I'd like to implement a district-wide initiative on disability awareness, and I'd like to ask Mrs. Pearson if she would consider consulting with us on the program. I was taken aback. I'd be honored, but I've been on hiatus from professional work since my husband passed away. This could be a way to ease back in, Ms. Keller suggested. Part-time consulting, on your own schedule. Your perspective would be invaluable. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. It was Tommy Mitchell, looking nervous but determined. "May I come in?" he asked hesitantly. Principal Reynolds nodded, and the boy entered, standing awkwardly by the door. "I wanted to say sorry again," he said, his voice stronger this time. "And I wanted to ask Mrs. Pearson something." I raised my eyebrows, curious. "Go ahead, Tommy." He took a deep breath. "My little brother has cerebral palsy too. It's worse than Lucy's. He's only 5, and he uses a walker most of the time. My parents take him to therapy, but it's hard for him, and for them." He paused, looking down. "That's why what I did was so messed up. I should have been the last person to make fun of someone for walking differently." The room fell silent as we all processed this revelation. It explained so much about Tommy's behavior. Often, those who bully are carrying their own pain or insecurities. "Tommy," I said gently, "sometimes when we're struggling with something difficult at home, we try to distance ourselves from it outside. It might have felt easier to mock Lucy than to face your feelings about your brother's challenges." He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. "My question is, do you think you could maybe talk to my parents sometime about your experience? They worry so much about what his life will be like." The request caught me off guard. This boy who had been tormenting my daughter was now reaching out for help for his family. "I'd be happy to speak with them," I said. In fact, an idea began to form in my mind, something that had been lurking just below the surface since I'd first seen Ms. Keller again. "Ms. Keller, you mentioned a district-wide initiative. What if we expanded that? What if we created a support network for families in the area who have children with cerebral palsy and other mobility challenges?" Ms. Keller's eyes lit up. "Like a community resource center? Connecting families with medical information, therapy options, and emotional support?" "Exactly," I said, feeling a surge of excitement I hadn't experienced since before James died. "I've been thinking about going back to work, but I've been hesitant to return to the same high-pressure hospital environment with Lucy needing me at home. But something like this, working in our community, setting my own hours, it could be perfect." Lucy, who had been quietly observing, suddenly spoke up. "I could help too. After school and on weekends, I could talk to other kids who have what we have." My heart nearly burst with pride. Just days ago, Lucy had been ashamed of her condition, trying to hide it from her classmates. Now she was volunteering to be a mentor to others. Principal Reynolds looked thoughtful. "The school district has a community outreach budget that's barely been touched this year. We could potentially allocate funds to help launch something like this. And I know several pediatric specialists in Burlington who might be willing to volunteer their time," I added, my mind racing with possibilities. Tommy, who had been watching this exchange with growing interest, said, "My dad's on the city council. He's always talking about wanting more community health programs." Over the next hour, what had begun as a confrontation about bullying transformed into an impromptu planning session for what would eventually become the Vermont Mobility Alliance, a support network for families across the state dealing with mobility challenges. 3 months later, I stood at the front of the school gymnasium, addressing a crowd of families, medical professionals, educators, and community members at the Alliance's official launch. Lucy stood beside me, no longer hiding her walk, but proudly demonstrating exercises to a group of younger children with similar conditions. Tommy Mitchell and his family were there too. His little brother Eli had become one of Lucy's most enthusiastic students, and Tommy had thrown himself into volunteering, as if determined to make up for his past behavior through positive action. Ms. Keller approached me as the event was winding down, her eyes shining with pride. When I helped that determined 12-year-old girl all those years ago, I never imagined she would go on to create something like this. I smiled, watching Lucy laugh with her new friends, both those with cerebral palsy and those without, including former bullies who had become allies. Sometimes, I said, the hardest walks lead us to the best places. As if sensing she was being discussed, Lucy glanced over and gave me a thumbs up. Her walk was still distinctive, still marked by the slight drag of her right foot. But now she moved with confidence through the crowded gymnasium, head held high. What had once been used to isolate her had become the very thing that connected her to a community. What had marked her as different now marked her as a leader, and as I watched my daughter navigate both her physical challenges and the complex social world of middle school with growing confidence, I knew that while the path hadn't been easy, for either of us, it had led us exactly where we needed to be.